the strategy and policy, we have Robert online who assures me he can hear us. And so we will commence with the meeting. And the first item is apologies. I think we're all here, so is there any expression of an apology? If not, we'll move to item 3, declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any. Has anybody got anything they wish to acquaint us with? Item 4, public forum, petitions, deputations. I've been notified of none, so we go to 5, which is the confirmation of the minutes. Would someone like to move that the minutes be adopted as a true and accurate record? David, thank you. Seconded Lyndall. Their accuracy is open for question. Is there any errors, corrections, erratum? Yes, Alan.
I was present. It's recorded in the minutes, but I'm not recorded as present at the front part of the minutes.
I'm not sure how that happened, but we will attend to it. Got that? Thank you. Anything else? Put the motion that the minutes be adopted. Those in favour would say aye. Against no, that's agreed. Item 1, approvals required. Lucy, talk to us.
Item 1 is regarding the RMA reform report that came from it's also known as the Randerson report. So about a year and a bit ago, the government initiated this report to be issued and to start the process of a review of all resource management legislation. And so the RMA has had a bit of a thorough going over as part of this. The outputs from it, I believe that you've all had a copy of the Randerson report, so I'm sure you've perused it in great detail, the 500 odd pages of the Randerson report.
I'm sleeping with it.
The report that we've put up today is just to kind of officially bring it to your attention, and also to enable my team to keep a watching brief on where this goes next. It's fair to say depending on what happens on Saturday, things may move speedier or slower on the recommendations within the Randerson report. But if the recommendations are taken whole suite, it's pretty dramatic change that we'd be looking for. So it's hopefully the report, I'll take it as read, but the outputs from it could be quite interesting. So over the next few years, it's definitely something we'll be paying close attention to. It's unlikely to move very quickly. Obviously, the RMA is a mighty beast, and to unpick it and recreate these other alternatives is going to take some time. So yeah, unlikely to move particularly quickly, but definitely needs a keeping eye on.
Medium Lloyd.
Yes, I suppose you've a little bit answered my question. That it's going to take some time, so it comes down to what happens in the process. I presume it'll be within this next government's term of 3 years, and there will be some urgency or not. I just think we just keep an eye on it and interact where we can. I'm not sure it's going to look like it could end up being 2 parcels of legislation and not just one, and I think there's some big hurdles to work through, so I think we just keep a watching group.
It's interesting that it potentially could even be 3 as well. There's obviously some gaps with the RMA that they've flagged in terms of climate change work and the interactions between the built environment and the natural environment. So yes, the potential for change is great, but when you're unpicking something as large and as entrenched as the RMA is, it's going to take a little bit of time. So.
Yes, I guess wait a little time, and they were that enthusiastic about it. They offered us the opportunity to have another copy if we wanted it, which I haven't bothered to take up. But we're coming up to 30 years since the RMA was first enacted, and that's normally about the life of a piece of legislation. There are some quite positive things in it. They're taken up, and I think one of the things that we all know that has been highlighted is that when you have something that's able to be interpreted differently in different regions, that tends to be what happens. And so hopefully we'll get a document that is a little bit more concise and after hearing Judge Shepherd the other day, some of the things that go in tandem with this, the ability to perhaps fast track changes will be quite helpful. But you're right, we'll have to watch where this thing goes. But there does seem to be a commitment from most parties that there is a fair commitment that this legislation does need an overhaul, and it's probably gone beyond tinkering. It does need a fresh look. So we will follow it with interest.
From memory, it was in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was an amalgamation of the Town and Country Planning Act and 6 other acts that were put into the Resource Management Act. And that process that time took about 4 years, from memory. So, yeah, this is a start. I'm not sure whether we count the work that Randerson's done in the 4 years or not, but yes, it's quite a weighty exercise and I think it will be dependent on how many parties are in the government and how determined they are to actually do that. And we haven't been given any timeframes that I'm aware of, but my question is about process. Should we want to put in submissions or I guess we've got time to work on that when we know what's actually happening and how much of the report is actually drafted into, and I'm not even sure what the process is going forward, whether there's going to be some cross-party work or whether just how on earth they're going to get it into a legislative format of a bill that will be worked on. So I guess time will tell.
The indications that we've been given is that they'll be scoping it before, they'll start work on it as soon as post-election, first 100 days, figuring out what it's actually going to look like and how much time it's going to take.
Right.
Yeah, we've been talking about it from a management perspective in terms of our LTP planning, things that we need to kind of keep abreast of for the next 3 years.
Yep.
Through Chair, and just following on from Lucy's comments, there'll be no doubt there'll be lots of opportunities for our engagement, and there'll be before it gets to the bill stage, and we'll certainly be keeping you abreast of that, and also the regional sectors is shaping up a work program as well. People like Lucy will be involved in working collectively. It's really important that the regional councils have a fair say on actually their view on what this should look like. So lots of opportunity. And
right.
It'll be a key bit of legislation for us to keep an eye on.
Lyndall?
Just the concern, I guess, around the consultation that will come out of those documents and the impact it will have on our own need for consultation. So I guess it's not a question really, it's just a concern that it's going to be really difficult and amongst all that noise for us to get our own work valued appropriately perhaps. But I'm sure you're well aware of that, Lucy. Thanks.
Sorry?
Robert's got a question.
Oh, sorry, Robert.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lucy, I just referring back when you were speaking earlier, you indicated that depending on which government or the makeup of the government that's elected on Saturday, would cause a different kind of impact in terms of this. Could you be a little bit more clear about that? I'm not sure whether you mean if the present government is retained, that there'll be a speedier take up of this or a speedier approach, or whether a new government, from the right would be attacking this more vehemently. The second thing is about the pace at which either wing is likely to implement this. I think that if we're thinking back to how changes were made in the earlier days, I think that we'll get caught out. I imagine that change now, particularly under a Labour-led government, especially one that's got the Greens as part of their makeup, will be driven by the new beast on the block, and that's climate change. And I think that we should be looking forward to much faster changeover in this field. But first of all, I just wonder if you could clarify what you meant.
I think, through you, Mr. Chair, what I was really meaning was depending on the makeup of the government will depend on how fast this moves. I think if Labour get a majority, or that they are able to form coalition with, like you say, the Greens and limited interaction from other parties, this will probably move quicker. But it depends on that makeup, I think. I totally agree, though, in terms of that faster pace of change and the climate change related action. It is definitely going to be the new kid on the block, and for the next 3 years, it's definitely, we're obviously talking lots about water at the moment, and we'll need to be getting work in that space progress rapidly, but climate change will be hot on its tail.
Thank you. That clarified that very well. Thank you.
Yeah, Nicole?
Yes, one thing I hadn't really picked up earlier in the conversations, the way this reads, it appears that the combined plans, they include district plans as well, so the one hearing would actually work through the whole thing. Climate change and what more things in the line, it's going to take a wee bit of organising.
It's certainly interesting when you consider the addition of the national planning standards as well. The two things combined, could definitely bring in some significant changes in that space.
Happy to move this, Chairman.
Right, move the recommendation, Lloyd, and seconded Bonnie. No further discussion, I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye. Aye. No, that's agreed. We move to item 2, matters for information. Kenneth, are you going to present?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take the item as read, but I'll just outline a few key points.
Perfect.
So the National Environmental Standards for Marine Agriculture will come into force on the 1st of December this year. Most importantly, I guess, is that the regulations apply to replacement consents for existing marine farms, not new consents. Under the regulations, except for existing marine farms in inappropriate areas, which is a discretionary activity, replacement consents have a restricted discretionary activity. Regional plans can have more lenient rules apart from those marine farms in inappropriate areas. However, under the coastal plan, marine farming activities are a discretionary activity, so the leniency provisions in the regulations are moot. Replacement coastal permits for marine farms will generally not be notified except in those situations that I've outlined on page 20. And just in terms of the implications for our own plan for clarity and transparency, we'll add a note to the coastal plan website that advises about the new regulations, and we'll also write to consent holders just to make sure that everybody's in the loop. And I'm happy to take.
Any questions of the report? Yeah, Alan?
I just thanks, Mr. Chair, just asked the question that note 1, inappropriate area for existing agriculture activities.
Yes.
Does Southland have any areas been identified as being inappropriate?
Yes, but they're already prohibited activities under our plan. So when the plan was developed, the council identified some areas that it didn't want any agriculture activities in, and it made those areas a prohibited activity from marine farms. So it's most of Fiordland Bay is around Stewart Island, east of Tiwai Causeway.
And so it's not going to cause any problem for anybody if there's been a classification change?
No, I mean, the council would be free to identify additional areas in the upcoming review, but based on previous classifications, we'll probably be looking to include that as a prohibited activity as well. So we probably fall outside of this.
Lloyd? Big Lloyd,
Thank you.
huge Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume that we're just talking about mussels and salmon. There's nothing else sort of on in the offing. There's no mention of a return to oyster farming at any stage.
Well, MPI has controls around oyster farming around Stewart Island through their biosecurity provisions. But this covers all types of farming because it applies right up and down the country.
The participants of aquaculture, whose responsibility is it to acquaint them with the fact that there is a new national environmental standard? Is that ours or is that government, and how does that actually work?
That was added as a suggestion to be helpful for the consent holders. I'm sure that they will be aware because, as I understand it, the aquaculture industry was involved with MPI as it was going through the development of these regulations. So it's just an added touch base with them.
Right. Thank you. And we go Lyndall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the removal of the biosecurity management. Yes, that sounds ominous to me.
Well, they decided that as a result of the feedback they got, more work was needed on it. It's quite a tricky.
Yeah, so
area.
what kind of work might that be and where
They
would it come from?
haven't been specific, but in our feedback on the exposure regulations, there was a lot of uncertainty about enforcement and who would be doing that and the monitoring and that sort of thing. So it was going to involve quite a lot of resource from regional councils to do that, and also I didn't address, it was just the marine agriculture, it wasn't land-based, so they wanted to bring in land-based to that as well. So I understand that EPA is advising the ministers before the end of the year. And so something we need to know that just when in the MPI round of discussions down here after Banamia, all of the operators and other people said that was one of the most important things to get some standardised biosecurity provisions to prevent those sorts of outbreaks happening again.
Thank you.
Lloyd.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering, this is going to land around about the same time as our own plan from the South and North Land Plan. Are we keeping these abreast of each other? Because I think we need to make sure that both of them, well, this one we have to have, the other one is more discretionary in some respects. We need to make sure that they are doing the same thing.
Yes, we have to reflect this, but in some instances it can be more lenient. So when the marine aquaculture discussion paper was discussed at the workshop, we presented an overarching framework, and this would fit in rather than change the activity statuses for what we have existing, but going through into the review, we need to incorporate it into that. So it's quite, that's a time really, because we can write it into the new.
Nicole, then Peter.
Yes, if this actually only does, NES is only applying to existing ones and they don't run out till most of them are in 2025. It doesn't appear to be a big issue, but just the places that we've had discussions in the past about where it would be appropriate. And in some of the discussions a few years ago, we talked about areas for weather conditions rather than being in Fjordland or near a national park, we were sort of ruling out. And I guess that's really a coastal plan discussion, but with some of this new technology being able to work in conditions that we haven't really envisaged in the past, so we sort of looking with new eyes on that one. I know it's not a discussion for this, but it would certainly will be for the coastal plan, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll, through the coastal plan review, we'll be looking at areas that are outstanding and looking to map those in the plan. At the moment, none of the, there's large areas of the southern coast that would be suitable for open culture and not those classifications, but it will be something to work through.
Peter,
Oh, that's right, thank you.
you done?
Yep.
No other comments? Would someone like to move the recommendations? We'll take 1 and 2.
I'll move.
Thank you, Lyndall. Seconded. Vic Lloyd. Question, those in favour would say aye, against no, that's agreed. Item 3, work programme.
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. So again, you'll see there's quite a lot of work on in the team at the moment. A large swag of it in the water space over the last couple of months since the gazettal of the Essential Freshwater Package. But a couple of things just to draw your attention to on the item. We've had further court direction, yet more further court direction, and what is currently underway at the moment is the order for us to produce the Section 32AA analysis on behalf of the court. That's to hopefully enable the finalisation of the Topic A matters. The analysis is on the new revised objectives and high-level policies that have been agreed by all parties now. Those have been put to the court. The court is comfortable enough to then have issued us a direction to do the 32A analysis on their behalf. So that work is currently underway. It's a substantial piece of work that my team is taking on with the assistance of Matthew from Insight, and we need to do it by the end of the month, so it's a pretty short turnaround on that. Simultaneously, we're also prepping for mediation on Topic B, and we've had to prepare topic groupings and description of outstanding items. We're hoping, and we're timelining and talking to parties at the moment, we're hoping to be able to do one topic before Christmas, which is B7, which is kind of miscellaneous. It's a group of odds and sods, for lack of a better word, and there'll be heritage matters covered in there and a couple of others, but we're hoping some direct negotiation as well as some pretty limited mediation we can get done pre-Christmas on that one. The bulk of mediation won't start until the new year. And the court again has directed a bunch of pre-work required before we're able to go into mediation, including the analysis which was already underway in terms of what the NES, new NES and the MPS means for the appeals. So again, the onus is upon us to undertake those pieces of work and to front up to other parties about what that means for their appeal points. So a lot of work happening in the team and outside of the team on the appeals at the moment. And we're hoping that once the 32AA is done, that the court will issue a final decision on Topic A, which will then enable us to barrel on into Topic B with some certainty. We also are doing good prep work for the next stage of the limit setting process, so the values and objectives work stream, which you'll have heard something about and will continue to hear more about this side of Christmas with the People, Water and Land programme. My team's been heavily involved in doing the review of those outputs and making sure that they are what we need for the next part, for the plan change. And then, as I said previously, or alluded to previously, lots of work happening assessing and analysing the implications of the Essential Freshwater Package. Coastal plan, as you just heard from Tanith, provision drafting has commenced on a number of matters that you've already given your steer on, and that's working through slightly slower than anticipated due to COVID and budget cuts and cruise ship shortages, etc. But we are still trucking along, and Tanith has meant that because it's slowed a little, I've managed to pull my principal policy planner, Tanith, into the water space a bit more. So one of my biggest brains being used for that, which is fantastic. So there are opportunities as well as challenges. The economics project is coming into its own. Emma's doing great guns and using the model in prep for regional forum discussions and the beginning of scenario testing, which you'll be hearing more about in due course. Bonnie and Emma, there was due to be a workshop this week with TAMI board members and yourselves, but it's been pushed, so that will pick up. You'll hear more about that then. I was asked a question at the last meeting about LiDAR. I think Councillor Baird, you asked me about LiDAR. So I followed up with the contractors and they are all ready to go. They're just waiting for a weather break. So they need kind of 3 days in a row minimum of good weather to be able to fly. Yeah. So hopefully as we get into summer, we'll have more of those.
February.
Yeah. And that they'll be focusing on our priority 1 areas. The way that the contract's been issued and the supplier, they're covering the whole country, the PGF project with Linz, but their intention is to get as much of the priority 1 areas done for all of the regions within the next 8 months. So by the end of the financial year, those priority 1 areas should all have been flown. And we're hoping after they're flown, 6 to 8 weeks after that, we start to get the data. So the data then goes away, gets processed and enabled with, and then comes back to us in order for us to GIS it.
So priority 1 is?
Coastal areas and Invercargill and Bluff. So the whole coast, not the whole coast, not the Fielden bit, but all of the productive FMU coastal areas.
So not the rivers, so
Not all the way up the rivers, no, just the
but I was thinking about flood banks and the
Estuaries,
upgrades, will it
yeah.
cover that area? Because that would probably be pretty useful, but,
which, sorry,
well, with the funding
the shovel ready funding.
Yeah,
Yep, so the Waihopai work that we've recently done we've got the Waihopai LiDAR, and we built on the work that Invercargill City Council has done on that. But this LiDAR program, the priority 1 doesn't include every river, no. But obviously they all get flown at some point within the next 2 years, but the coastal area was prioritised.
David? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, Lucy, on water management, topic B. Is it hope that from all parties that this goes through as mediation on the way through, or do you see that actually going, is it considered from the judge's point of view, mediation would be the outcomes?
So what we've already been asked from the court to do is for us and for parties to identify any areas that they felt couldn't be mediated.
Yeah.
The only party that's noted that has been Meridian and the infrastructure topic, for the simple reason that they don't feel that they can mediate out where they are apart with the other parties on that matter, the YR groups, etc. You'll remember some of you will remember, back end of last year, before I was off, we came to the council to double check our position in terms of Meridian and in terms of the activity status, and the direction was given that we would abide by the court's direction. That remains to be our position. So we will be at that hearing. They've asked for a hearing, so that topic will go straight to a hearing, and we've been asked to lay down the timeframes it would take for evidence prep, etc. And we'd be doing a faster evidence prep timetable than we did for the fuller hearings, so 6 to 8 weeks on that as well. So all of that prep is having to be done, but we're likely to have quite a limited role in that hearing. It's broadly going to be Meridian and YR groups with us in the region. So that's the only matter that we have got an indication of that won't be able to be mediated. The judge is very keen on us getting into mediation as quick as we can, so we're hopeful that there's a good swag of it we can get sorted through mediation. I think we'll see how we go. The NES and the MPS is going to provide some additional challenges, so we need to work through that.
If I could add on, just another query, just with what's going on to do with cultivation and that sort of thing at the moment. Obviously that'll be part of, topic B is more the practical side of farming. How's that going to, at this stage, it sounds as though there's could be some movement within those areas. How's that going to play out?
I suppose it's one of the good things about mediation when compared to a hearing, is that your prep is much closer to the time when it actually is happening. So you're not having to prepare 10 weeks out or further than that when things might shift and change. So we'll be able to be quite flexible up until the point when we're actually in mediation, if we do hear any changes. But the analysis that's currently underway with other people in my team is around where the NES and the NPS, but mostly the NES, makes some appeal points moot, or is in conflict, or is more stringent. So we're having to run that through in advance of going into mediation so that we know kind of what's off the table, and what might have been narrowed, the scope might have been narrowed.
Are you signalling, Robert, or are you scratching? Right, okay.
No,
Laurie.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just a little bit concerned that we can mediate to a position of agreement, but it actually has no practical use on the ground. I won't get into detail, but I've asked the council of Southland a question yesterday, but I was really surprised that they couldn't give me an answer as quickly as I thought that we would have an answer. So I'm really concerned that we may get into a position that is potentially agreed by all parties, but actually when you look at it from is it workable on the ground, which is picking up what David's saying, we may not be able to meet expectations or timelines for activities on the ground. And I think we need to make sure, I think this is why the group after this meeting is going to have a conversation, but we need to make sure that not only can we do these things, but we can actually monitor them or consent them, or we can actually give a program for people on the ground to actually say, I know I can do this, I'm within the rules, and I've got the necessary consent or approvals, and I go out there with confidence. If we can't do that, then it doesn't matter how long this thing sits in the Environment Court, it becomes a beast in itself. And I think that's why, on the back of what we're seeing here, the RMA is really important. It's missed its principles. The principles it's set up with are now seem to be missing, and we're into a fight. And I think we want to clear that table again and start with new direction, new principles, and new guidelines. So I just want to make sure that we actually land this thing that is practical, not as just theoretically agreeable.
So through your chair, just on that, it's the role really of the subgroup to have a discussion with the planning team involved in this so we can socialise and there's a two-way conversation and no surprises. So in terms of impracticality, I guess the NES has got nothing to do with us and we're trying to fix that now, but we've got to make it work and that's what we're doing, but is that what you meant by impractical, Lloyd, the NES?
Yeah, well, there's parts of the NES that we really have to put a rule of can we actually do this stuff? So I don't think anybody's saying we can't, it's just, I think it's people saying, I'm going to find it very, very difficult. So what does that mean? I need time to think a farming structure, a farming system change to meet that expectation.
So let's park that because
I think in this work program, we just need to be clear going into the court that if we're having difficulty with some of the stuff that's coming through, make sure that we don't make more complication through a process that sometimes we can mediate and say we will agree, but when we come to put it on the ground, we actually have trouble. We can't, like we've got consents in place now, which we can't actually put compliance over it.
And I think, through you, Mr. Chair, in addition to Rob's comments too, the subcommittee does have a role to play, but in addition to that, the mediation team for certain topics is currently being worked out. So it's not just going to be my team that are involved in that. We're going to be pulling in consents and compliance team members too, so that what we are mediating, and certainly in the farming topic, that's a real need. We've got to make sure that we're taking the opportunities that are presented to us in terms of appeal resolution points, and that we're also giving the most practical lens over the top. So yeah, when we're thinking about mediation, it's not just about how the rules are going to land, it's actually about, okay, we know that there's some issues, how can we iron some of those out on the way through as well? So we are pulling all of those streams together, and certainly the issues register use and the use of the wider team as well is really important. So.
I've got Peter, Nicole, then Alan. Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just Lucy, about limit setting there, it's pretty clear that it's going to become quite dominating around this place, probably going into next year. And while you're working away in your team, those communications are very, very important. And I noticed there was a communication out the other day around share your why. It's really good. It's taking people right back to the start. And we need to actually answer all those frequently asked questions. We need to anticipate them and answer them through those communications. So when we get to the end point, or close to the end point, where people will actually really start to realise how big this is,
that they understand that there has been a process in play for a long time, and we just need to remind them of the steps we've taken to get to this point. And it was really quite interesting with Judge Skelton here the other day talking about the process. You've got to get involved at the start, at the ground floor. You can't wait till the end. So, just keep those links together with the communications.
Right, just statement. Goodbye, Nicol.
Going back to the previous conversation, Mr. Chairman, I think the timing of the mediation on some of these issues obviously not going to be before February, March. Some of these ones that probably opaqueness over the NES. I think the working party will pass back submissions through to us and back to the ministers and new government by then, and that may help in that regard. So I think the weather grazing one, which is causing concern out there at the moment, most people have got another 12 months till next October unless they're going to change the intensity of what they've been doing. And I'm pretty optimistic we'll get some clarity, because the NES is a more stringent document than our own, and we will have to give effect to where it finally lands. So hopefully the things that don't appear to be workable will be listened to in the long term, and without affecting the high goals that everybody actually agrees with. So.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, absolutely, the stringency element of the NES does have an effect upon what the appeal points were. That scope has been narrowed slightly, so that's the analysis that we're currently undertaking. And before any mediation is commencing, the instructions from the court has been parties need to be very aware of that additional lens that we now need to be applied.
All right, Alan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So it's just a question on the comments you made earlier regarding, because of the new NES and the NPS, that might reshape and change our plan to the point where we can't or don't need to mediate because it's been decided for us. If there's greyness in whether the rule is being influenced or being informed by the higher level documents, who is going to decide whether mediation is going to occur or not going to occur? So how do we mediate on what we need to mediate, or how do we decide that one's out, that one's in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so effectively the way that the decision, there is some greyness, there's going to be some greyness across the board, but the analysis is pretty detailed and robust from my team in terms of what do these things mean, and where appeal points drop off, we can't determine that because they're not our appeal points. So the parties are being directed to actually also conduct analysis and to determine where their appeal points may no longer be requestable because the NES overtops them and the MPS. So parties have that onus upon themselves to be able to make the determination as well. So it's
as far as, will it come from the bottom up, or will it come from say the top down, saying, well, sorry, we're going to delete that one now, and that one, or there will be some consultation whether those appeal points are still, they might want to debate them or mediate them.
by consultation, do you mean out into the world?
No, I think, sorry, mediate was my point.
Yes.
Well, we want to mediate them, yet maybe ourselves are saying we don't think that one can be mediated now because.
Yeah, so a bit of both. It's a bit of a mixed bag. We'll be saying, from our perspective, this is our interpretation of what the NES and the MPS means for our positions. And those of you on the subcommittee after this meeting will hear more about those positions and how much engagement we'll be needing from the subcommittee. But parties will be asked to do the same thing. So they'll be also kind of coming in sideways and assessing theirs and saying which is where their greyness is, whether they want to push it one way or another. So that applies to all parties. So whether they are on the right or the left or the pushing for a harder line or otherwise. So that won't come back in terms of more external consultation. Mediation will be determined by the courts about those bookends, but the bookend definition is happening in the realms of the NES and MPS. So we've got to be giving effect to those things.
So there will be some discussion if, say, Federated Farmers or Fish and Game still want to pursue something.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So, and then it's for them, they'll have to justify to the court why those things either drop off or are still active. It's not for us to make those determinations because they're not our appeal points. It's our position, we get to determine what our stance is on our appeal points, on the middle ground, and how we want to take, how hard a line we want to take on the decision version.
Okay, if there's no further discussion points. Moved, Lloyd, seconded, Nicol. Put the motion, those in favour will say aye, those will say no. Item 10, extraordinary urgent business, haven't been notified of any. Item 11, publicly excluded, we haven't got anything there either, have we? That I'm aware of, so that will conclude the meeting. Thank you for your attention and